So welcome everyone. It's wonderful to continue our investigation of fearlessness, working particularly with the Tonglen practice, but also working with supporting teachings and practices. And in this session, we're going to go deeper with the Tonglen, and I'll be referring both to a supporting prayer and to the biography of His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche. So we often receive these teachings from extremely accomplished people, or we're reading the biography, for instance, of Lord Jigten Sumgun, who gained enlightenment doing this practice. And it's helpful to touch base with someone who is alive today, and particularly with the biography of Garchen Rinpoche. He's allowed insight into his process of going from an outer understanding, certainly some meditation accomplishment, to deep innermost understanding. And that's why I'll be referring to his biography, because it's not like anything I've ever read before. So those folks who haven't seen His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche, this is a little photograph of him. So I'm going to start with a prayer from Lord Jigten Sumgun, or a series of verses that is a training exercise. And this is a training exercise really worked with by countless lineages, variations on it, and certainly by His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche and many people who are practicing today. And it's called Using Wisdom and Courage. So we are in this special moment where there's so much confusion and fear arise. And we are particularly looking at impermanence of the body in terms of sickness. And so in any given moment, there are 4 possible outcomes, and these verses work with those outcomes. I rely on you, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, until I achieve enlightenment. Please grant me enough wisdom and courage to be free from delusion. If I'm supposed to get sick, let me get sick, and I'll be happy. May this sickness purify my negative karma and the sickness of all sentient beings. If I'm supposed to be healed, let all my sickness and confusion be healed, and I'll be happy. May all sentient beings be healed and filled with happiness. If I'm supposed to die, let me die, and I'll be happy. May all the delusion and the causes of suffering die. If I'm supposed to live a long life, let me live a long life and I'll be happy. May my life be meaningful in service to sentient beings. So that covers everything. If we get sick, we're happy. If we get healed, we're happy. If we die, we're happy. Or if we have a long life, we're happy. The key is using these mind trainings to get from our natural in this moment resistance to what we don't want, to welcoming and being happy with whatever arises, and to see ourselves as connected to all sentient beings in whichever situation that we're in. So pretty much for most of us, when we're practicing Tonglen right now, or any of our interactions with people, we still have a sense of there is a self and there is an other. So the purpose of Tonglen is to help us understand our interconnection so completely that we let go of the separation between self and other. And these verses are a way to help us connect whatever is going on in our lives to what's going on in the lives of all sentient beings. In some way, whenever we talk about the Dharma, it's as though the seeds of what we have been practicing open up a little further and teach us more. So we can see at one level, this verse is like the first teaching I gave on just like me practice. just like me, if I'm sick, just like me, many beings are sick. May all of our sickness resolve into healing our confusion, healing our bodies. But the key word in this verse, if I'm supposed to get sick, let me get sick and I'll be happy, is the supposed to get sick and the happy part. So if we start looking at that, I think changing the language would be helpful a little bit. All of these things were translated by very human translators. So we could say, instead of if I'm supposed to get sick, we could say, if I have the conditions in this moment to get sick. And we could say, well, we all have the conditions in this moment to get sick because we all have a human body, right? So the human body just gets sick. So in addition to that, we have this very contagious disease going around the world. So if I encounter that disease, I have the conditions. And then in addition to that, for some of us, we know that if we have any condition that lowers our immune system, if we're overweight, if we have diabetes, if we have heart disease, if we're receiving treatment for cancer, those also create further conditions that would make it easy for us to get sick. So we can start to understand karma in this very simple kind of way, just that there are all kinds of conditions. And we have many of those conditions. And certainly in all of the millions of lifetimes that we've lived, we created conditions and they're all following us. So in any given moment, we certainly could get sick. And may I meet that sickness with happiness. So how do we start working with the mind trainings so that we choose happiness as the mental state to greet the illness that's arising? And there are also some simple ways to think about that right now. For one thing, most of us in this group here online at the moment are living in the US where we have access to good conditions, right? So when I think of my friends in India, I know that we have very different conditions. We're sheltering in place, but we have a shelter. So we have the conditions to use this moment to apply meditation. So that's another reason to be happy. We have met with profound teachers who can give the teachings that are appropriate for this moment. So we know where to get them, and for many of us, we've received them. So that's another reason to be happy. So we can meet this moment with happiness, and we can start to see that there is a shared human condition and a profound connection, a profound interconnectedness. That's a little bit more difficult to understand, but we will in the next two talks go into that interconnection, the training to see the interconnection, and the grounded understanding of emptiness that pervades that understanding. But let's just accept that we're working on seeing the interconnection for this morning. We also see in the outer conditions that there are all different kinds of responses to those outer conditions in our shared humanity. We have the incredible altruistic healthcare workers and first responders. We have all the folks who are showing up to their jobs, and we see how totally dependent we are on them. So this illusion of comfort is on the basis of all of these wonderful people who are showing up with their altruism. So that's another reason to rejoice and be happy. Rejoicing in the kindness of so many people that allows us to meet sickness with a happy, welcoming mind. And we can start to also see in our training that because we have these conditions right now, we can start to see anytime we deviate from this happiness. So repeating this verse over and over again, part of the purpose is to see if I'm supposed to have the conditions to get sick, let me get sick and I'll be happy. It's showing us that this would be a wise and courageous way to respond to the conditions that we have. And it also shows us like a spotlight when we're not happy, when we're not appreciating these conditions, and when we're reacting with fear, anger, or distress. So for instance, when we check in and see the responses that are not so healthy, maybe by the government, maybe by the people who are not behaving in a safe way, we start to see frustration, and we might see anger appearing. So it's a very easy time to practice. We just can tune in, watch the news, and we can see anger arising. So we can start to say, okay, working with this situation, we can absolutely see what's going on in our minds, and we can use this situation to be of benefit. Now, then we start to work with how can I convince myself essentially that the anger is pointless. So we've been talking about this in previous weeks, and we can start to see pretty clearly, I turn on the news, I get angry and frustrated, and that makes me feel not great, right? I can just absolutely see in the moment the truth of what the Dharma is saying. If I get angry, upset, start inner rage going, I absolutely am going the opposite direction of peace and mind. So in this moment, I can actually see the truth of the Dharma, that I am causing my own suffering. I'm the one who is giving rise to the anger, and it actually is causing me suffering. So that's a truth that we can recognize completely and say that absolutely I understand this. In this moment, I'm here alone in my comfortable room, and instead of appreciating all these wonderful kindnesses of beings that are supporting this, I'm feeling nothing but anger and rage. I feel justified, the government is crazy, but I am the one creating the anger in my own mind, right? So I am the one causing my suffering. And not only that, as we sit in meditation, we can start to see, as we're watching the news or as we're sitting thinking, I can actually see the moment that the anger starts to come up. I can observe that thought, and I can see this is a thought. There is a truth to the teaching that anger is a thought, that it rises. I either intensify it or I don't intensify it, and it dissolves in its own way. So that's another truth that we can absolutely see for ourselves. And finally, we have to get to the point that we're just sick of maintaining that habit, that we see it, we understand it, we see that it's creating suffering in our own heart mind. We can see that we call up friends and we continue that discussion and help everybody we know get angry and excited. So we start to see the destructive quality of that habit. So let's go back to the verse. If I'm supposed to get sick, or if I have the conditions to get sick, let me get sick and I'll be happy. So I want to compare that to Garchen Rinpoche's experience, because what I think is so enlightening in his biography is it goes year by year through the 20 years in prison, where he's working with this night and day. And it gives us a sense of how long it takes to get this very human habit to be totally uprooted. And that really helps me not be discouraged when I see how persistent the habit is, how the repetitive nature of it is not a failure on my own part. It is simply so deep rooted, so primal, that it takes time and consistent effort. So we're thinking, oh my goodness, the shelter in place, I think it's been going in Maine only 5 weeks. So when Rinpoche was in jail, he was just, as he describes, exploding with anger. And it wasn't till 3 years of forced labor, torture, deprivation that his incredible teacher arrived at the jail. So every day, just in conditions that we would find it difficult to imagine, they're so extreme. He was building his rage. His country had been destroyed. His friends and family had been killed. Angry, angry, angry. So this is a quote. The teacher arrives in the 3rd year, and this is a quote from the 9th year. Therefore, not through intellectual learning, but through my own painful experience and my own resolute resignation to suffering, that I recalled with all humility that in order to be free from all torments, I would have to purify my own mind and to free this very mind from all hatred. So this is the 9th year of working day by day by day. Their forced labor was making bricks. So what did the teacher say to him, and what was this process like? For any aggressive person who always finds himself in an aggressive situation, the demon is there in his own mind. The demon is not only quietly residing in his mind, but it is expressing itself in the world around him. Thus, this hatred is 1,000 times more fatal than a suicide bomb. The bomb could take away the lives of many, including himself, but the hatred will go on living forever, even after this life ends. It will continue to inflict pain and destruction to himself and countless others, life after life. So by really understanding that, by seeing how he was continuing his anger, causing himself suffering for 9 years, every moment of every day, he came to the absolute resolution that this was true. So we can say, we think we see it sometimes, but until we see it so clearly that we make a focused, concentrated resolve to change our mental habits, we won't learn how to use every single moment of every situation to change that happy, and to be happy that we're seeing it so we can use that moment to change it. So it was interesting. Khenpo Munsel came to the prison about 3 years into it, but then he never had a chance to meet Khenpo Munsel or talk to him. And they were watched by the guards all the time. Some of the first conversations he had were in just passing the cell of Khenpo Munsel momentarily, or in the bathroom. So those were the only times there was any kind of a moment to even have just a few words. And one of the first conversations, Khenpo Munsel said, well, what is your meditation like? And he said, well, I'm really good at Mahamudra. And he had been trained since he was a child by his father. He had been in the monastery and being trained. And at this point, he's maybe 25 years old. At the same time, he was saying to Khenpo Munsel that I want to kill the Chinese guards. I want to kill the soldiers that are overrunning Tibet. I feel justified in killing them because they're destroying the Dharma. So the first thing Khenpo Munsel had to do is, you have to look at your hatred. This is absolutely a wrong view. Hatred is not going to change anything. No one has ever become enlightened by hatred. And it's absolutely a wrong view to think that killing can change anything. So I'm saying that just for you to see how extreme his anger was, this man who turned into this incredible Rinpoche. And Khenpo Munsel had to explain to him, yes, I understand that you've had meditation training and that you think your Mahamudra is your strength in meditation. But as long as you have anger and hatred, that's a sign that you haven't accomplished your meditation. So no one has ever achieved enlightenment with hatred. And you will understand that your meditation is going well when your anger and your hatred start to resolve themselves. So this is another pointing out instruction for us. We may be sitting on our cushion a lot. We may be having some wonderful meditation sessions from time to time. But when we turn on the news and we see some of the people in charge and start getting angry, that shows us that we only have a partial understanding of meditation because we're easily giving rise to anger and frustration, and that takes over, hijacks our mental calm state and our hearts full of loving kindness. So we don't have a lot of strength in meditation, and we can see that because we can see how easily it is to be taken derailed. So their daily work in the prison was making bricks. They had to make bricks. And he said that once he said to Khenpo Munsel, this is just so frustrating and so pointless and so useless, that here we are. And, of course it was really cold and that was backbreaking work. And you can imagine how that would feel in your hands when it's numbingly cold to have to make bricks and things like that. So he might have felt that I'm justified in thinking that this is useless work. So Khenpo Munsel started training him in how to use essentially what is right in front of us, what our daily moment-to-moment life is. And he said, carrying earth and stone as you've done these many days, that is not useless. That can bring great results. Your carrying the earth contributes to the making of bricks. With these bricks, buildings will be made. Those buildings will house people. Those people will have better living conditions. And thus this will be able to pay their taxes. And due to that, roads will be built and electricity will be brought here and people will be happier, all because you're carrying the earth. If you work with a mindset like that, it will benefit everyone and the country. You're angry at this nation and at the Chinese soldiers, but it's actually just a few leaders who have corrupted minds and aspiration. Meanwhile, this nation really means all the people living in it too. So try to benefit the people in whatever you do. If you plant vegetables, the people will eat them. If you make bricks, the workers will build houses. They will also get a wage. Don't think of your work as wasteful. Everything is interrelated. Think of all of this work as beneficial activity. Once you understand it all from that perspective, then you have to do whatever and do it right. And furthermore, we must see this world as a Buddha field and the sentient beings as enlightened beings. Thus, you should see all of your hard work for the benefit of others as offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So with this fairly simple instruction of how to meet the work that was assigned with a kind of happiness of offering it to the benefit of all sentient beings and imagining all of the people being benefited, he was able to take that first seed of instruction and gradually train his mind. And it's absolutely the same training that we're talking about in this first verse. If I'm supposed to have the conditions to be sick, to be in prison, it doesn't matter what the conditions are. Let me be happy. Let me accept this situation. Let me be sick. Let me be in prison. But let me train my mind to be happy with this situation, seeing it as benefiting beings, seeing it as an offering. May it purify my negative karma and the sickness of all sentient beings. So by making the bricks and doing it as an offering to all sentient beings, he started purifying his mental habits of anger, one brick at a time. His anger at the army, his anger at the takeover of Tibet. And this went on for years and years and years. So if you can imagine every day, I turn on the news just to check in, what's the new thing going on with the state regulation? What's the new thing going on, overall in the country and in the world? And I can see every day different kinds of charged emotions arising. So I can see, wow, it's just like every single day, brick by brick, I'm just trying to see one thought at a time and change one thought. To see it as a thought of anger arising and to watch it dissolve. And it's a very, very slow process. And I would think it would be incredible if I could get to the end of this. This may go on for a year or two, especially for those of us who are over 65. Can I go through this effects day by day, minute by minute, and learn how to be happy and joyful in this situation by seeing the thoughts that are arising and switching them to thoughts of how they might be of benefit to sentient beings. And as we go further, to offerings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And in this way, in the simplest way, I'm certainly benefiting myself. I am becoming happier. But, we're all calling our families, we're all calling friends, we're all in touch with people. When we do go out, we're connecting with people. And so there's a sense that change of mental habit is actually reaching out in visible ways that we don't notice, and sometimes visible ways, and assisting different sentient beings. And another way some of our great thinkers are working with it right now are saying, when we look at what's going on, we can see that there's just this huge pool of anger, and there's a huge pool of ignorance. And you can see on some kinds of minds, there's a pool of, I have to get everything for myself. So it's as though we're a representative human mind, and we have the pool of wanting to be safe. We have the pool of anger. We have the pool of ignorance, not wanting to see and not wanting to know. And by working with our mind, it's as though we're not adding one more drop to that pool. So we may think that changing our individual mind is not having a strong effect, but actually just one of the ways Rinpoche expresses it in his biography, it's like, what if you were lying down under a huge mountain of stones? If somebody took one stone off, it would be one stone lighter. So there's one less drop of ignorance that is starting, the different folks fighting against each other. There's one less drop of anger. There's one less drop of, I have to have that for myself. And just think in terms of our government, the folks that are behaving in ways that are so destructive to the health of people. One less drop of ignorance, one sense of I'm going to keep my eyes open and see this emotion as it arises. I can see when it arises and I can cut through it. It's one less drop of ignorance that's pervading the whole mindset that we can see enacted in the same ways, country by country by country across the globe. So we can have confidence that there is an effect. So he goes through a couple of stages, and I want to read quotes from different stages. Khenpo Munsel said, "Do your work well with a mind free of hatred, and then your karma will be cleansed." After this, I went back with a new attitude and became more and more conscientious about my labor in the prison rules. Soon, after many months, if not years, my forced labor didn't torment me as much. So it's still hard. There's still no food. It's still forced labor and beatings, but it didn't torment me as much. No longer did I find it difficult to carry the earth and stone, as I thought of the earth as offerings of jade and amber and turquoise and diamond. I thought of myself circumambulating and carried a huge amount of pure gold offerings on my back. Then one day, I found that however much I had to carry, I was happy doing it. So he gradually shifted from this is torment to I'm benefiting beings, I'm making the circumstances for warm houses, to this wheelbarrow is full of gold that I'm making offerings to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It's still backbreaking work. But at some point it totally shifted and his whole perspective of reality shifted. So this is how it happens. It's with us having that resolve to see differently, to see the truth of the Dharma differently, to change our habits that are tormenting us. And finally, just on its own, one day he realized he was actually happy. I no longer had any trouble with the forced labor. Carrying earth and stone became my Dharma practice. Furthermore, as Lord Pagmodrupa said, if you practice with no interruption, appearance will manifest as your teacher. So everything started appearing as his teacher because I knew how to merge my higher meditation with everything I did from moment to moment. So his experience on the cushion, which he had been fairly proficient in, became inseparable from the moment-to-moment experience in the prison. That would be as though we're doing our bodhicitta practice or our Tonglen practice on our cushions. We turn on the news and we see the most destructive leader making the worst decisions, and we have no interruption in the most profound bodhicitta practice being extended toward that person. There's no interruption from the continuum of the perfect loving kindness and compassion, no matter who is in the field of vision, no matter what being is there. Meditation and afflictive emotions no longer were in separate places. They became one and supported one another as far as my mind is concerned. They became one and supported one another as far as my mind is concerned. So we can use this time, this condition that we're in, the incredible suffering that we're witnessing all over the world, as the basis for extending and expanding our condition of bodhicitta mind, not only to the obvious suffering, but to all the people who are making mistakes, all the people who are making things worse. There's no difference because we see exactly in our own mind that we had the same kinds of thoughts and feelings, and that when we had those thoughts and feelings, it became a Dharma teaching how to reverse those and turn it into joy and bodhicitta. It was through Khenpo Munsel's oral instructions that I came to understand the actual meaning of Tonglen. What touched me deeply was the special mind training instructions. He taught me about inner Tonglen, which is taking afflictions as the path. The view and practice are actually related to the practices of Dzogchen as well. I understood that I needed to expand my immeasurable love to all beings, those like me and those who do not like me, and to actually feel their suffering, to feel it like it was my own suffering, and to generate the wish to take away that suffering with compassion. Then naturally, their suffering would come toward me. Then I would pervade their entire being with love. Depending on outer Tonglen, the fruition of inner Tonglen. If you understand it correctly, the actual meaning of Tonglen has to do with the inseparability of self and others. Ultimately, self and others are inseparable. When you have love, it will naturally pervade all beings. When you recognize and let go of your own afflictions, you help let go of other beings' afflictions. When suffering arises, think that you are taking on suffering of all beings. Think that you represent them, and then you meditate in that state. You're standing as the representative, and you're meditating in that state. One day, you will realize that there is no difference between self and others. There is no difference between suffering and happiness. And that is indeed secret Tonglen. There's no difference between self and others. There's no difference between suffering and happiness. It is a condition, a thought passing through mind. The substance of that thought has no difference. And the substance of mind, which we could say from the perspective of Buddha nature, the substance of our Buddha nature and the substance of any other being with mind, their Buddha nature, is not different. So when we clarify a little of our own ignorance, it's like a dust being swept off the dust of everybody's ignorance, because a little more Buddha nature is shining through. If you see Tonglen in the general context of taking in another person's suffering and giving him in return your happiness, there is still a strong sense of self and others. There is still you who's doing the giving and the taking, and there's still the other person whose suffering you are taking in. You don't need to practice this way, Khenpo Munsel said. But if you can understand that the ground of our minds is the same, the ground of your mind and the ground of the other person is the same, then you can understand the ultimate view. You can practice Tonglen accordingly from the context of the ultimate view. Even if there are many different types of suffering, there is really only one thing called suffering. At the time when you yourself are having a great suffering, you should think that the minds of all beings and your mind have the same ground. There's only one single mind. The mind of suffering of all beings in the three realms and your own are one and the same. You should also think that the essence of the suffering of all beings and your own suffering is also one and the same. There is only one suffering. When you can see them as the same, you and all beings will naturally become non-dual, and at that very moment, meditate on that suffering in the single mind's natural state of you and all beings. When something afflictive arises, liberate it through your meditation and through the working of your own mind, that suffering will dissipate. Liberate affliction and it becomes wisdom. By liberating your own affliction, you liberate the affliction of all beings to some extent. Just think, if you have a large mountain and you yourself are being suppressed under that mountain, even if just one stone is taking away, then the suffering load is that much lighter, and at that very moment, you would be able to lessen both your suffering and that of all beings. If you understand mind's nature, then you will recognize the essence of whatever suffering and afflictive emotions there may be to be emptiness. They appear only due to conditions, and they lack true inherent nature. When suffering does not harm you anymore, then your mind will have great bliss. At that time, you meditate, making self and others inseparable. Then that bliss can diminish the self-grasping of all beings. That happiness that is being given, the bliss that comes from the practice of Tonglen, of giving and taking in the context of a non-dualistic single mind stream. When suffering does not harm you anymore, then your mind will have great bliss. At that time, you meditate, making self and others inseparable. Then that bliss can diminish the self-grasping of all beings. That happiness that is being given is the bliss that comes from the practice of Tonglen, of giving and taking in the context of a non-dualistic single mind stream. Then he said Tonglen became his main practice in prison after he received these teachings from Khenpo Munsel. But he was in prison for 20 years. And he was working, starting where we're probably starting, not understanding what Khenpo Munsel said, right? We can hear it, but we need to keep working with it, seeing little bits of the truth of it moment by moment, and letting the focused and determined continuity of the practice show us how this is in slow, experiential, gradual ways. So he would get a profound teaching, and then the goodbye would be mindful, work honestly, have a good heart. So we can stick with what we can understand at the moment. But I want to go, this is probably another 4 years working with this, to what he said. So he's describing his work. He's still making the bricks. And if everybody didn't do their quota, the people who didn't do their quota would get beaten. And so he became someone who would practice night and day invisibly. So he said that like when they had an opportunity to rest, he would lie down and he would practice continuously, silently. And it was so, he used every moment so well that his friends would play cards on top of him. So when there was a moment for to have a break, some of his friends would start playing on cards on top of him. And if he twitched at all, if he broke his concentration and moved, they would scold him for disturbing the cards. And he would give away food, give away his shirt, just give away everything. So his perspective started changing, and his commitment to benefiting beings and seeing the happiness of other beings, and his dawning understanding provide him with greater levels of joy. So if someone said, "Oh, your shirt looks warm," he would give them the shirt, not out of martyrdom, because it actually gave him such great joy to give the shirt. And he was saying that he could see that there was this one older Lama, and that Lama was having trouble making his quota. So he would do that Lama's work first and then do his own work. And the Lama would say, oh, please, please do your own work first. I don't want you to get beaten. But at that point, he had been working with this so long and so consistently, there wasn't any difference in his mind between the joy and suffering anymore. If he got beaten, it wasn't any different from not being beaten. Let me read this part. I would already start with his pile of earth first and was never able to finish my own pile. The prison guards criticized me badly for this. So the poor Lama begged me, please do your pile first and then help me. However, I really did not care. It really did not matter. I thought to myself, we are all in prison. Praise or criticism doesn't matter. I don't care if they praise me or blame me. All I want to do is help this poor Lama. I developed the sincere wish to be of benefit to others with the minimal help I could offer, and to put others first before myself. I couldn't do much, but I would be very happy in whatever small ways I could help others. I also began to call everybody in the prison darling. One day someone told me that Khenpo Monsel mentioned to him that Garchen Rinpoche is a bodhisattva. He said, well, I never heard Khenpo Rinpoche say that to me. But hence on, many other people kept telling me Rinpoche said so. I should say that by then, I no longer suffered at all in the prison. So the conditions, the outer conditions had not changed at all. He was doing backbreaking labor. His country was still overrun. People were still being tortured. People were still being beaten. But he no longer suffered no matter what the outer conditions were, because everything was a teacher to maintain the bodhicitta, and the bodhicitta filled him with bliss, and the capacity to even help a tiny bit in that situation filled him with happiness. So back to our verse, if I'm supposed to get sick, let me get sick and I'll be happy. May this sickness purify my negative karma and the sickness of all sentient beings. He used all of the outer conditions, and it was a process of something like 18 years. He was in prison 20 years. But the point where he no longer suffered at all came from that level of focus night and day on seeing that what was arising in his mind were thoughts that he could use to understand meditation, to understand the emptiness of each and every thought, to understand how to let go of every single kind of afflictive emotion, and that every single moment of the day was a way to offer to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas or his fellow prisoners. And eventually that became the reality that he saw, as opposed to the original situation where he describes himself like a bomb exploding with anger, exploding with hatred. So that is exactly why we're practicing, and we're each practicing on any given day in the capacity that we have, with a kind of trust. I focused on his biography today to give a sense of someone that most of us know managed to trust in one small piece of the Dharma and then use that to become profoundly enlightened, to become a profound bodhisattva, to work with every conceivable human feeling in his mind until it became the human accomplishment, the bodhisattva mind, the complete bodhisattva mind. So we're approaching 11 o'clock. So I'd like to do a fairly simple, fairly quick Tonglen practice. Many of you have been doing it for weeks, but let's just say, as we go through it, the steps are in trust, flashing on your Buddha nature or your capacity to have a moment of pure love, breathing in something uncomfortable and breathing out, offering kindness, clarity, freshness. Then thinking of the pain and difficulty of someone you know, breathing that in, exhaling your health, your strength, your courage, and then making it larger. So we'll go through the steps in just a very quick way, and I'll do it with bells. But what I encourage you to do is just notice what arises in your mind and the particular habits and patterns that are unique to you, the particular conditions that are unique to you. When you start shutting down, what is your edge? And how to welcome that and say, can I be a representative for all sentient beings and take that in? Take that moment of anger arising, that moment of fear arising, and let it dissolve into empty space, liberating it into wisdom for all sentient beings. So first, flashing on your own Buddha nature. Now breathing in something that's dense or smoky or smelly, breathing in discomfort, sending out comfort. Stretching someone dear to us, someone beloved, breathing in their suffering, just with a natural opening. Even here, finding your limits. And as you find a limit, stretching and being happy that it's clear to you, that you can see it. And breathing out well-being. Now making it bigger. Looking for your edge and being happy to see your edge. What your limit is in this moment. Stretching with that. Seeing the thought of fear, the thought of resistance, allowing it to dissolve. And because it dissolves, it's a moment of seeing wisdom. So we can look at our own minds, and whatever is arising at the moment, whether it's a feeling of scarcity, whether it's a feeling of fear, whether it's a feeling of anger and frustration with how things are being handled, we can say, just like me, all over the world, there are beings, and I'm a representative of every human mind. Can I liberate my one habitual thought in this one moment for all human beings who have this same fear, anger, frustration? Can I offer the warm shelter that I have, the good food that I have? Can we just change that habitual pattern, meeting each moment with a mind that is shifting to appreciation and joy instead of fear and anger? And seeing that as a representative until we finally have the direct experiential understanding of that extraordinary Buddha nature, that Dharmakaya that pervades all beings, all minds. So I'm going to read those 4 verses again. They're on the website under resources. There's one resource that's all Tonglen, and it's in that group of teachings, handouts on the website. Thinking of the process that Rinpoche went through, having the teachings, first of all, even though they were just a seed, while he was still filled with anger, then working with them till he could get to the bigger mind. I rely on you, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, until I achieve enlightenment. Please grant me enough wisdom and courage to be free from delusion. When he was no longer suffering, he was free from delusion. If I'm supposed to get sick, let me get sick and I'll be happy. May this sickness purify my negative karma and the sickness of all sentient beings. If I'm supposed to be healed, let all my sickness and confusion be healed and I'll be happy. May all sentient beings be healed and filled with happiness. If I'm supposed to die, let me die and I'll be happy. May all delusion and the causes of suffering of beings die. If I'm supposed to live a long life, let me live a long life and I'll be happy. May my life be meaningful in service to sentient beings. So we know Rinpoche went from that prison in Tibet to guiding a worldwide Sangha, at this point of hundreds of thousands of beings, teaching in a way that could be understood, so that every day he's using every minute to free beings from their suffering, to give them the teachings that he received and the practices that he received. And every moment that we practice even the tiniest bit, then surely everyone in our environment is benefiting. Even the animals can tell the difference between an angry mind and a calm mind. And surely the widening circles will benefit as well, as just one tiny drop is lifted from that giant pool of anger, that giant pool of ignorance, that giant pool of scarcity mind. So I'm going to just say the dedication, and then if you want to share or ask questions, we can do that. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase, higher and higher.